First Samuel chapter 21. We are now studying the part of David's life where he is a fugitive, he is on the run, he is running for his life, an Israeli outlaw, wanted, dead or badly wounded, instead of dead or alive, dead or badly wounded. Saul just wants the guy dead, so he's been on the run since chapter 19, but he did come back to Gibeah, where Saul was living at the time, in chapter 20. And he did that in order to talk to Jonathan, to first of all, I believe, let Jonathan know, hey, I really didn't do anything. I don't know if your father's going to be saying stuff about me, but I just can't bear the thought of you, Jonathan, my very close friend, thinking, negative things about me, so I want to come and clear the air on this. I didn't do anything. And then number two, to convince Jonathan that his father, King Saul, really was still trying to kill David, just absolutely set on killing David. And that did take some convincing because Jonathan was already convinced that his dad was still honoring the oath, the vow that he made not to kill David, which, by the way, is a weird thing, right? If you have to make a vow not to kill someone, I feel like that's weird, like it really shouldn't come to that. I don't know. Hopefully that's not you, like every morning. I will not kill my boss today. I will, Lord, I vow to you, I will not. I hope that's not you. We really shouldn't have to make these big, flowery vows to the Lord just not to kill people. But regardless of that, Jonathan was eventually convinced, and all it took was for Jonathan to stand up for David, for his dad, Saul, to get irate with him, and then fling a spear at him, his own son. When that happened, I think it's then that Jonathan finally realized, okay, maybe my dad isn't as well adjusted as I thought he was. I'm suspecting now that David was absolutely right about all of this. So, at Jonathan's urging, David was off and running. He did not have time to go home and pack a bag. Couldn't get clothes, couldn't get sandwiches in baggies. Didn't have time to consort with friends and see if anyone wanted to come along with him to help him. He didn't have time for any of that. He's on the lam. He's all alone. He has nothing with him. And that brings us into chapter 21, verse 1. And we read in verse 1, Then David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. So we do know that the tabernacle used to be located in a place called Shiloh. But in 1 Samuel chapter 14, Shiloh was destroyed, and the temple was then on the move. And at this point, apparently, the temple is situated in Nob, which is just 2 miles southeast of where Saul was living at this time, Gibeah. And the more interesting thing to me is that it was just about 1.5 miles northeast from Jerusalem, from the Temple Mount. This is actually in a region today that they refer to as Mount Scopus. And they say, I've never been there, but they say you can be on the top of Mount Scopus and you can look and see the Temple Mount. So that's how close the tabernacle is at this time to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where the temple would ultimately be built. Very ridiculously close to Jerusalem. Nob means heights. I know you may see that a little bit different in some of the older lexicons, but I do believe they are wrong. I believe that word is meant to mean heights or, high places. And Ahimelech was the high priest with the tabernacle located there in Nob. And his name, Ahimelech, means my brother is king. But don't think that means that Ahimelech is the brother of Saul. He's not. I don't know why he was named this. I have no idea really, but maybe it was something to the effect of, well, hey, we have a Jew as a king. That's one of our brothers. Let's name our son, my brother is king. For whatever the reason, that's his name. And that's always an easy one, when you see melech in a word. That word always means king. Melech means king in Hebrew. So then you just figure out what the root words are around it, and you can usually crack it pretty easy with just a little bit of Hebrew knowledge. And David, here's the really cool thing, knew Ahimelech. He had obviously viewed Ahimelech as somewhat of a spiritual advisor to him. We're going to see that in the next chapter next week, in chapter 22, when Saul is pressing Ahimelech to try to figure out why he helped David, his worst enemy. Ahimelech's going to say, well, look, yes, he did come and inquire before me, but it's not the first time. He's been here before. He's come to me plenty of times for advice, so he's going to tell us that in the next chapter. There's a familiarity here with this guy, and to me it's like, I guess you put yourself in David's sandals here, and if you get the timeline just right, David is probably early 20s, no later than mid-20s at this point. So he's what most of us would still call a kid, right? When someone's 24 years old, you're like, they're just a kid. He's a very young guy, very inexperienced in life. He's got a lot on him at this point. He's running for his life. He's all alone. He is not equipped for this kind of journey. He has no way to protect himself. And he goes to the only guy that he knows that, well, maybe there's a chance I can trust, and that would be Ahimelech, who was the high priest in the tabernacle. There's a familiarity there with Ahimelech. Now, he's not going to trust Ahimelech enough to tell him the truth, like at all in this chapter, but he does have to trust this guy enough to zip his lip, because the lies that David's going to tell Ahimelech, he doesn't even want that getting back to Saul, because he doesn't want Saul even on his scent. So he trusts this guy enough to run to him seeking help. Reading on in verse 1, and Ahimelech came to meet David, trembling, and said to him, why are you alone and no one with you? Now, Ahimelech was trembling because David is alone. Reason being, David was never alone. Remember who David was, and this is the extent of what Ahimelech would know as of chapter 21 early on. He would think David is still the guy to Saul, the right-hand man for Saul, the armor bearer, a captain over 1,000. This is a VIP in Saul's army, and this guy was never traveling alone. He was always traveling with his soldiers. He was always traveling with guards. He always had protection. He was always on mission. So if nothing else, it's very apparent here that, again, Ahimelech knows nothing about the falling out that occurred between Saul and David. And again, in the next chapter, we're going to see that when Saul charges Ahimelech about helping David out, Ahimelech will basically say, well, as far as I knew, he was your top guy. Why would I not help out your top guy? How could I have known any better? Now, that is a really good excuse for why he helped David here in chapter 21, but unfortunately, well, let's keep reading. I won't spoil it. Verse 2. Now, let me just say this. Don't get too attached to Ahimelech, all right? Don't get too attached. Verse 2. And David said to Ahimelech the priest, the king has charged me with a matter and said to me, let no one know anything of the matter about which I send you and with which I have charged you. So it's top secret. I can't tell you. If I told you, I'd have to kill you. This is need to know, and you don't need to know. And he says, I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. The first thing David wants to do here is swear Ahimelech to secrecy. And the reason being is that this is a big fat lie, but as I stated, he doesn't want even this getting back to Saul. He wants to leave no trace, no footprints in Nob. He wants to slip in and out unnoticed so that Saul is not on his heels, remembering that it's not just like a group of soldiers after him. It's literally the whole nation. Saul's the king of Israel. There's not a person in the nation that he could not command to be on the lookout for David, to capture him, to kill him, what have you, and that they would not be obligated to obey the king in that matter. So he's really up against it here. He needs to slip in and out. And that secrecy that he's asking for, that was not just for David's good. I'll go ahead and let you know. The next chapter is going to show us that this would have been for Ahimelech's good as well. If he had kept this a secret, this would have been for his good as well. It's like one of those situations you see in the movies when someone's asking you a question and you don't want to tell them, so you say, look, the less you know, the better off you are. The more you know, the more danger you're in. That's kind of the situation here. The more that Ahimelech knows, the more he's in danger. And then yes, he has completely lied to Ahimelech. That should be obvious. Maybe it's not if you don't know much about David and the chapters prior to this. But yes, this is absolutely a big fat whopper of a lie that he tells to Ahimelech. David is not on any top secret mission. He's not IIA, instead of CIA, Israeli intelligence agent. He's not IIA. He's not on any top secret mission. He's not going to a meetup location to meet his soldiers. None of that's happening. David is completely on his own here. All of this was a lie. We know why he's lying. Saul is trying to kill David, and David is running for his life. This is now the second time in 2 chapters that David has succumbed to the temptation to lie. Now, granted, in the previous chapter, he really wasn't one to deliver the lie. He was the one that shared the lie with Jonathan, and he got Jonathan to do his dirty work for him. Jonathan, I don't know why, but Jonathan delivered the lie for him. Well, in this chapter, he is telling his own lies. He is here sharing complete lies. That's bad enough, but then when you consider the fact that it's more than one in this chapter, it's really one after another. There's more lies that are going to be coming from David. And then the worst of all, at least to me, because I'm in ministry, is that he is lying to the high priest. You can't do that without lightning bolts in the rear end, can you? That's a big deal, lying to the high priest. I wouldn't want to be in David's shoes, but David he's fine to do that. Doesn't seem to bother him. I want to emphasize once again that it is never okay to lie, no matter who you are, even if you're David, even if you're the guy, God's man. That does not mean that it is okay to lie. It is absolutely 100% wrong, sinful for David to lie here, as he does in this chapter. And if you needed proof for that, then you just go ahead and read the next chapter, and you're going to see that the fallout from David's lie is pretty intense. It's pretty severe. It's pretty heartbreaking, actually. David's lies get Ahimelech killed, but not just Ahimelech and his family, but not just Ahimelech and his family. All of the other priests in this tabernacle, the entire staff, and all of their families as well. 85 people are going to be murdered. Most of them, many of them priests, all because David has told a lie here. He's going to admit to that in the next chapter. No doubt he feels remorse over that. There's regret there, but lies are like bullets. Once you let them fly, they're going to do their damage. There's no stopping them. There is a reason why lying is a sin, bearing false witness. There's a reason for all of that. The reason it's such a major sin that it actually made the top 10, the 10 Commandments. The reason it made the top 10 list is because it causes real life damage. When we lie to others, it causes real life damage. Still think David was a perfect guy? Maybe you're starting to rethink that. Wait, this was starting off so well. We finally had a hero. Yeah, he's still a hero. Don't give up on David just yet. This is just the beginning of David's story. He is going to be a man after God's own heart. The Lord is going to make sure that happens, but at least now we're starting to see that for David to get to that place where he would be the man after God's own heart, it took a tremendous amount of grace from God for that to happen. It took grace to forgive David for all of these early mistakes that he's going to make, and some of the pretty nasty later ones as well. And it's going to take a lot of grace from the Lord to take and shape this David guy into a sanctified version of himself, a man of God that would truly seek, desire, and strive to please the Lord. We often hear the comic book versions of our heroes. We hear the good stuff. And when you start digging through the full story, the full accounts of their life, you can get a little blown away by that. Whoa, I didn't know he did that. Wait, he is a hero, right? He's one of our heroes, right? But he did that? Are you sure? Yeah. the more we learn about the entire stories, the entire Bible stories of our heroes, the more that we realize that they were just like us in their terrible failures. And the more that should encourage us to know that, well, then doesn't that mean we can be more like them in their terrific successes and their wonderful victories? And the answer to that is yes. That's what these stories are supposed to teach us. I'm glad the Lord didn't whitewash it all, only give us the good stuff. This would be a very convicting, impossible book to see all of these perfect people that serve God. But to see them in their humanity, that helps a lot. It helps you to be able to relate. Okay, yep, David, I got that problem too. I'm working on that too, and I'm going to learn from your lessons. Verse 3, now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever is here. Verse 4, and the priest answered David, I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread, if the young men have kept themselves from women. Verse 5, and David answered the priest, truly, women have been kept from us, as always, when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy, even when it is an ordinary journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy? I take it that means that today is the Sabbath day, so this is a special day, and I'll talk about that more after verse 6, but let's read verse 6 first. So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which is removed from before the Lord, to be replaced by hot bread or fresh bread on the day it is taken away. All right, the holy bread or the bread of the presence, this is referring to the table of showbread, and that was in the holy place, not to be confused with the Holy of Holies. That was that little table, golden table set up in the holy place, that first compartment of the actual building structure of the tabernacle or temple. And what they would do is every Sabbath day, which is a Saturday, they would bring in 12 fresh pieces of bread or loaves of bread. Pieces is more accurate for us because they weren't like, Wonder Bread loaves in the bag with all the slices. These were like pita pocket kinds of pieces of bread. And they'd have these 12 pieces of bread, representative of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. And those would be placed on that table, and they'd stay on that table all week. And then upon the following Sabbath, they would bring in fresh bread, hot cakes, and they would change out the bread. They would take the week-old bread, they would take that off the table, they would put the fresh bread on the table, and then what happened to the week-old bread? The priest got to eat it. Yeah, and it's probably not as bad as it sounds. I mean, I've had day-old donuts. They're just as good as, maybe not just as good, but pretty good, especially if you really like donuts. Week-old donuts, I can handle that as well. This was food only for the priests. That was like the rule. Only the priests could eat this bread. They couldn't sell this. They couldn't give it to anyone else. According to the law of Moses, only the priests could eat that bread. But Ahimelech, the high priest, he is willing to give that bread to David. But he does have one requirement. And it's funny, too, because he's going to break one law from the law of Moses, but he's not willing to break the other law from the law of Moses. The other law, the one that he's digging his heels in on, would be the law of being ceremonially clean when you come into the tabernacle and partake of anything from the tabernacle. So what he's looking at here is relationships with the soldiers and their wives. I know it says women. He's not talking about just running around and having affairs with women. That wasn't done in Israel. And this is referring to the soldiers having sexual relations with their wives. And the way this worked in the law of Moses is when you had sex with your wife, husband, when you had sex with your wife, you were considered ceremonially unclean until you would afterward go through a ritual washing for cleansing. And then you had to wait until evening came because the Jewish New Day started at evening. So once darkness hit, boom, you were clean again. And you could go to the tabernacle and worship, or later on the temple. I guess the way to do that is you and your wife, you have sex earlier in the day to try to time it a little bit before dark. And then you do your ritual cleansing, and you got like 5 minutes left until the sun goes down, and boom, there you were only ceremonially unclean for like 5 minutes. You got to time it right. But anyway, that was ancient world problems for the Jews. And this guy wants to know, look, you guys didn't do anything to be ceremonially unclean, right? Because I will go ahead and break the law. I'll give you this bread, even though you shouldn't have it. You're a commoner. You're not a priest. But I won't break the law of spiritual purity. If you're ceremonially unclean, I'm not going to give this bread to you. And of course, David, well, he's lying about his men. He's like, yeah, the men they're sexually pure. They're ceremonially clean right now. Absolutely lying, because there is no men. He's got no men with him. It's all a bunch of lies here, but he now makes this agreement. Problem solved. He gets the bread. Verse 7. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg, the Edomite, the chief of Saul's herdsmen. Now the name Doeg means troubled. Perfect name for this guy. Because when you see what he does in chapter 22, you'll learn all you care to know about that guy in that chapter, and you'll see just how troubled this guy is. He was a despicable human being. Doeg was an Edomite, which is interesting because Saul defeated the Edomites in 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 47, which means that this guy was spared, that he chose to defect from his own nation, his own people, and that he pledged his loyalty, obviously, to King Saul. I would refer to him as a hireling. Now, I know there's a good way to do that. This was kind of similar to what Ruth did, but Ruth actually had a heart to love the Lord, to serve the Lord. This guy does not. He's a hireling. He's like, I think all he cares about is he going to stay alive? Is he going to get food or pay? And is he going to have a place to lay his head at night? If he's going to get those things, then he'll do anything you want him to. He'll be a hitman for you. He'll take care of your problems. He's just that kind of guy. And he's even the type of guy that would feign spirituality. And I think that's what we're seeing here when we read the statement, detained before the Lord. That did not mean that Doeg was under divine arrest, locked up in the tabernacle. There were no prison cells in the tabernacle. He was detained by the Lord in the sense that he was observing some kind of vow before the Lord. And I hope this was at the tabernacle and not in the tabernacle, because again, he's an Edomite. He's not an Israelite. He is a pagan, and therefore is not allowed in the tabernacle at all, not even inside the outer courtyard, that largest outer section where you come in and have access to the brazen altar there on the left. He's not even allowed in that. So I hope this means that he's just kind of like hanging around the tabernacle, maybe hanging outside of the skin walls, the tent walls of the tabernacle. I mean, it is skin. And he's dropping some eaves. He's hearing everything that's going to take place here. And I guess it would be, if you're just separated by a tent and there's folks inside the structure of the tabernacle talking, I guess you could probably hear them. And that's what's happening here. He's a monster in his heart, but he's going through some religious motions here. And he's unfortunately going to hear everything that they talk about. You can see the problem coming for David. But back to the flow of the chapter. Task 1, that's been completed by David. David got himself some food to eat. What does he need now? What 2 things do you need if you are running for your life and you have nothing? What 2 things do you need first? Food and a weapon. You need a weapon. So that's what David's going for here. Verse 8. Then David said to Ahimelech, "Then have you not here a spear or a sword at hand? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." And of course, that is another lie. I mean, again, the whole secret mission is completely a bogus story. David's pants are starting to catch on fire. He's probably trying to, like put him out and hope that Ahimelech doesn't see that. Yeah, I mean, this is insane here. Yeah, I had to leave so quick. I didn't have time to grab my sword. Come on, David, you're the greatest soldier in the nation. Is anyone going to believe that? That Saul would send you on a mission that was so critical, so urgent, that you thought, well, I don't have time to take my sword, but I'm just going to go. Not very believable. Verse 9, and the priest said, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you struck down in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, take it, for there is none but that here. That's the only sword here. But David said, there is none like that, meaning period. It's not just that there's no sword like that here. There's no sword like that anywhere. That is a special sword. So he says, give it to me. Now, the tabernacle is not the place to go if you're looking to arm yourself with weapons. There's just as there's no prison in the tabernacle, there's no gun shop or sword shop or knife shop in the back of the tabernacle. It's not a place to get weapons. They do, oddly enough, have one weapon there. I mean, amazing that they did, but that was the keepsake, the memorial. It was kept in the tabernacle to signify a pretty momentous victory for Israel. That, obviously, as we read, is the sword of Goliath. And this had to be a shot in the arm for David. A message, I think, from the Lord. A little bit of a wake-up call for David to hold that sword in his hand, to think back of what he did with that sword, to think back of that moment and the moments that preceded it and kind of compare his current situation spiritually to the situation he was in the valley of Elah when he cut the head of Goliath off. Just to reflect back on that, something that happened not all that long ago in this story. A time period in David's life where he had big faith in God and faith in God alone. There was no panic in him. There was no fear in his heart. There was no lying to try to advance himself so that he could escape from an enemy. He just trusted the Lord, and the Lord came through for him. Simpler times, right? Good old days, good times. I think he has a similar thing that's going to happen in the next chapter. He's going to try, well, I won't give away all of it. Let me just put it to you like this. He's going to end up hiding out in the cave at Adullam. And it's interesting because the opening of that cave overlooks the valley of Elah. That's his view every morning, every evening, all throughout the day. It overlooks the valley of Elah. Every day he would have to look out there and have the same thing, this past memory of a moment in his life when he had complete faith in God, big faith in God. And that faith was rewarded by the Lord showing up in an incredible way. Maybe you've got something similar to that in your life, maybe a picture from a retreat, and every now and then you see it and you're like, wow, I remember how on fire I was for the Lord back then. I remember how much my heart loved the Lord. It was fresh, it was new, it was vibrant. What happened to me? Or maybe it's an old song, an old Christian song. I got a lot of those from old church camps. I think back to those old church camps and my zeal, my passion for the Lord. It all comes flooding back to me. Lord, don't ever let me lose that. Don't ever let me lose my edge. Don't ever let me lose my zeal. Something that comes back as a memorial that reminds you of past moments with the Lord that inspire you to move forward with the Lord. Things that remind us not to stray from our course. Things that remind us, all we need is you, Lord. That's when you were all I had. You were all I wanted. And I've gotten away from that. Help me to get back to that. The simplicity of that. The power of that. You being enough for me, Lord, in all things. And desiring only you above all. Verse 10, And David rose and fled that day from Saul. That doesn't mean like Saul's on his heels. That just means he's trying to get as far away from King Saul as he can. And it says he went to Achish, the king of Gath. What? Is that a typo? Would he really do that? Would he really go to Achish, a Philistine king? Why would he do that? Why would he go to Achish, a Philistine king? Well, here's a better question. Why might he go to Gath? Why might he go to Gath? Now, first, let me give you some possibilities here. Some think that David went to Gath because he thought things would be safer for him in Philistine territory rather than in Israel. That if he went there, he would be safe from Saul there. Saul wouldn't bother him there without, engaging the Philistines in an open war. And that could be maybe, that is certainly a possibility, but I don't know if that really adds up for me. I have a conjecture about this. I don't know of anyone else that thinks this, which is probably an indicator that I'm wrong. But when have I ever been afraid to share conjectures in the past? I have a conjecture about this. Here's my conjecture. Gath is the hometown of someone pretty significant. Do you remember who? Just a fellow by the name of Goliath and his 4 brothers. So think about this. Here's David. The Philistines hate him. He's killed so many Philistines in his life, he comes strolling into Gath, the hometown of Goliath and his brothers, and he is carrying with him Goliath's sword. Why might he be doing that? Does he think it's a good idea to do that? Does he think they're going to see the sword? Say, oh yeah, you're the guy that took out our big guy. Man, congrats. Come in, hang out. Yeah, you're welcome. No, come on. Of course he's not going to think that. Why is he going into Gath with Goliath's sword? Here's what I think. If you remember from our study of the David and Goliath chapter 17, right? The sword of Goliath weighed 600 shekels or 15 pounds. I told you in that chapter that when David took that sword, it was way too big for him to use in actual battle. You remember me teaching you that? A 15-pound sword. Yes, he was able to cut Goliath's head off with it, but that's different than swinging that thing in battle and actually trying to fight with it. If you don't believe me, go home, get yourself a 15-pound bar of lead, swing it around, see how well you do. That's tough. A 15-pound sword, that is not for a normal human being. You're going to want something around 4 or 5 pounds, not 15. So my thinking is that David realizes the only sword he can get is a sword that's too big for him to use in actual battle. My conjecture is that he's coming to Gath to say, look, this is an important sword. If we, the nation of Israel, keep this sword, it's an insult to you here at Gath. It is embarrassing for you at Gath because it is a memorial of our incredible victory over your best warrior, the giant Goliath. But here's what I'm going to do. Today only. Everything must go. I'm willing to give this sword back to you, this very important piece of your history, if you'll give me a much smaller sword, one weighing around 4 pounds and 0.96 ounces, somewhere around in there, something I can actually fight with, something that's not going to take me 2.5 minutes just to make one full swing out of. And if you'll do that, then we're both happy. You get the sword back. It's no longer an insult, an embarrassment to you, and I get a sword that I can fight with. I think that's what's taking place here. He couldn't have done that in Israel because there's some question about, does Israel still have swords? The last we read, only Jonathan and Saul had swords. That's it, just 2 guys in the whole nation. Now, they have killed a lot of Philistines since then, so there's probably swords that were spoils from war that the nation of Israel has now. They probably have more swords than just the 2, well, and Goliath's sword, 3. But who would have those swords? Soldiers. And what's the deal with those soldiers? Well, as far as David's concerned, they're completely devoted to Saul, and they have to obey his every order. So he can't just go up to a soldier and say, hey, can I have your sword? Not going to work. But maybe it would work in Philistine country, specifically Gath, the hometown of Goliath. Remember, they were really good at metallurgy. I mean, the Philistines are still renowned for that to this day, how good they were at metallurgy. And they had the market on it. They wouldn't let the nation of Israel do their own metallurgy work. So, yeah, this makes sense to me that this would happen. Now, if that's true or not true, I guess it matters little, but here's what matters. How did it go? David, are you there to trade a sword? Pawn it, try to get yourself a smaller one. Are you there to try to hide out? Are you trying to make an ally with the Philistines? Why are you there? Well, here's what matters most. How did it go? Did it work? Did it go well, David? Verse 11, and the servants of Achish said to him, is not this David, the king of the land? Interesting. Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? And here's the quote, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Now, first of all, how did they know that David was actually the real king in the land? That's a puzzling question. How did they know that? It wasn't printed in the Israeli newspapers. I know that. That was hush-hush. Very few people knew that. How did the Philistines know that? Or did they know that? Maybe they're just saying, look, I don't care who the king is. That guy right there, David, that's the guy you got to watch out for. That's the killer. That's the real guy in charge. He's the one that you don't mess with if you're a Philistine. I don't know. I don't know the answer to those questions. But it is very interesting that they know David is the king of the land of Israel. And here's another question I don't have an answer for. How did they know about the songs that the ladies of Israel sang about Saul and David? How did they know that? Did maybe their antenna pick up the local Israeli radio station? I don't know. But all I know is they know the song. And the funny part about the quote in the song is when they quote the section about, Saul killing his thousands and David his 10,000s, you realize those thousands and those 10,000s that those little Jewish ladies are singing about and celebrating, those were Philistine lives. So there's people, that heard this song or heard about this song, people that are dealing with Philistine loved ones that they've lost to this guy right here, David, and here he is in town. So they're thinking, yeah, this guy, he is a Philistine killer like no other. So many families are grieving losses of loved ones because of that guy right there. And now he shows up here. That's a little sus. For you older folks that aren't as cool, sus means suspect or suspicious. All right? That's a little suspicious. That's a little suspect. I don't know if I'm comfortable with David being in town here in Gath. I don't think there was probably a person in Gath that didn't violently and tenaciously want David dead. I don't know how David thought this was a good idea. Clearly he's not thinking clear, and clearly he's panicked. Clearly he's grasping for straws. But what do we expect? As big as his faith was in one moment, just not that long ago, he is still, in fact, a human being. And he's never been in a situation like this before. He's a very young guy. He's a very inexperienced guy. And don't forget, he is a little bit distracted right now, running for his life from a madman king. All right, let's read on in verse 12. And David took these words to heart. That means he realizes now, I probably should have thought this through a little bit better. This wasn't a very good plan, was it? David took these words to heart and was much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. He realizes his life is in danger now. Verse 13. So he changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands and made marks on the door of the gate and let his spittle run down his beard. Okay, so That means that David was clawing at the wooden gate or the wooden door of the gate to the walled city here. He's clawing at it like an animal. He is slobbering all over himself, and not the kind of picture you would expect to be painted of God's number one man. The guy that God picked and thought, yep, this second guy is going to be far better than the first guy. Well, here's the second guy. Here's the better guy, acting like a mental case. He's faking insanity in order to escape. Actually, knowing the culture, it was a pretty smart plan, because in the culture, these heathen religions, they were very careful about how they treated folks that were insane, people that were lunatics. They believed that that was a curse, a judgment from a god, and that if you interfered with that insane person or you mistreated them in some way, that God might get upset with you interfering with that judgment or that curse, and you might catch some of that judgment or curse yourself. So they didn't want to touch situations like this. If someone was insane, it was just like, okay, let's get him out of here. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to do the wrong thing. I don't want to get the gods mad at me. I don't know if David's using that knowledge, but that was true, and it's going to work, especially because David really sold this. I mean, he was really acting mad. And I think he has Saul to thank for that, because where else would he learn this kind of behavior except from watching Saul in fit of demonic rage after fit of demonic rage, doing the same kind of stuff, foaming at the mouth, acting like a madman. And here's David pulling from that knowledge. Oh, wait, I know how to do this. I've seen this. I've seen a madman. I know how to act like a madman. Thank you, Saul. Really good learning under your mentorship. But it is sad, we admit, to see David in this condition. You know, compare this with chapter 17, the David and Goliath story, where David walks in like a boss and says, I don't care who it is. Let me at him. I'm here now. Problem solved. The Lord's with me. I'm not going to let an enemy talk that way about God or Israel. Let's do this. That was David in chapter 17. And how we see him in chapter 21, twitching and scratching and foaming at the mouth, acting rabid. Not a good look. David once had the Lord's anointing oil running down his beard. Chapter 21, he's got his own spittle running down his beard. How far he has fallen. It's a tough thing to see in the Word of God. But this is a season in David's life. This is not the end. This is a black mark on his testimony, but it is not the end. The Lord is not done with David. And in fact, the Lord's just getting started with David. He's just getting started. He's got to turn this young man into a king, and to do that, that means putting him through the ringer for the majority of his life, to teach him hard lessons and to teach them fast. You know, I feel like that if you really want to learn wisdom in life, you have to go through hard stuff. So if you want to speed that up, well, then you just go through a long period of time of hard stuff. Like if the Lord is going to try to speed up wisdom in a person, he's got to be like, okay, first 10 years of their ministry, impossible. Let them have it. We'll get them through it. We'll get her through it. And then when they're done, yeah, that's a big head start for wisdom. They're going to have wisdom before anyone else. So that's what's happening to David here. So that David can be put through the ringer, he can learn his lessons, he can get wisdom, and it can come to the point where he can trust God consistently in all situations. Not just when he's facing a heathen enemy, but when he's facing an internal Israeli enemy as well. All situations, the Lord has to make his faith consistent. His faith is flash in the pan right now, big in moments, really big, bigger than anything you and I can muster. But it's not consistent across all the areas of his life, and the Lord wants to make it consistent. Verse 14, then Achish said to his servants, behold, you see the man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? What do you expect me to do with him? Take him to the psych ward. Get him out of here. Verse 15, do I lack madmen? I love that. Like, do I lack madmen? Don't I have enough crazies around me to deal with? That doesn't say much for the Philistine citizenry, does it? Like, there's just so many crazy people here in Gath. Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow to behave as a madman in my presence? You really wanted me to see this? Shall this fellow come into my house? And that would mean my homeland, my city. So he's saying, in other words, get this lunatic out of this city. Get him out of here. Now, do you remember when we were studying about David being lowered out the window, escaping from Saul's attack on him that night in his home? You remember that? Remember that study? And do you remember that when we covered that, I shared with you a psalm that David wrote specifically about that night, specifically about that event in his life, and how that gave us insight about what was going on in the heart of David as he was being lowered down the window and beginning the process of running for his life. Well, I have some more of that for you tonight because, actually, both tonight and next week. I have two for you tonight. There are two chapters, two psalms that David wrote about this very event that we just read about in 1 Samuel chapter 21. And I want to read just a little tiny bit of it for you, okay? You're going to have to go home and read both of those chapters. They're short. You can do it. Go home and read both of those chapters on your own and think back to this story that you studied tonight, because that's the kind of stuff that David was thinking. That's the kind of stuff that was going through his head as this event was unfolding, but also the lessons that he learned from this event. So here's the first one. You can write this one down, Psalm 34. Now I'm just going to read verse 1 and verse 4. Let's just do those two verses, verse 1 and verse 4. Here's what it says. Psalm 34, verse 1, of David, when he changed his behavior before Abimelech. Now, don't confuse Abimelech with Ahimelech. The guy's name here, the king's name is Achish, but Abimelech was a name that the Israelis used to use as a title for any heathen king, okay? So Abimelech, they're just referring to this king. He says, when he changed his behavior before Abimelech, which is referring to Achish, so that he drove him out and he went away. All right, and it says this. Here's what he wrote about this event. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. Verse 4, I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Does that sound like something that was going through David's mind that night, that day, that night, as he's strolling into Gath with his sword? I will bless the Lord at all times. I don't know, but this is either what was going through David's mind and heart, or it's something he learned from that. Here's another one to write down, Psalm chapter 56. I'll read verses 1, 3, and 13. To the choir master, according to the dove on far-off terebinths. So that's the tune that this was supposed to be sung to. And it says this, a miktam of David when the Philistines seized him in Gath. Be gracious to me, O God, for man tramples on me. All day long an attacker oppresses me. Verse 3, when I am afraid, I put my trust in you. 13, for you have delivered my soul from death, yes, my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. So I just think that's interesting, isn't it? That David wrote two songs specifically about this event. And it reveals to us, just as last week's psalm did, it reveals to us that even in the midst of David struggling with his faith and really showing us no outward signs of being a very spiritual man in these two chapters, what it's revealing to us is that what we were seeing on the surface was a little bit misleading, but what was going on in his heart was quite a bit more spiritual than we would have ever perceived. Because as David's doing all this stuff, as he's, being let down out the window, as he's running for his life, as he's lying to the high priest, as he's acting like a madman, all of this stuff that he's doing, he is in great fear And the whole time, according to what I'm reading from these 3 chapters of Psalms now that we've read in conjunction with these 2 chapters of study, David was desperately calling out to the Lord the whole time. Like basically one of these deals. Lord, I know I'm messing this up. This is going as bad as it can. Lord, I don't know what I'm doing. Lord, please help. But the point of the Psalms that he wrote was to let us know God did help. God did have good purposes for what he went through in this chapter. Now, we'll finish up with this really quickly. Jesus in the Gospels referred back to this story, 1 Samuel chapter 21, when the religious leaders were upset with Jesus and his disciples for on the Sabbath day walking past fields of grain, picking grain, and then eating the berries of grain. They were really upset with him that he would do that on the Sabbath, because not according to the law of Moses, but according to rabbinical tradition, according to adapted laws that were built on top of the law of Moses, the Jews believed that if you did anything like that, like if you picked a wheat berry or a grain of some sort, a barley berry, and popped that in your mouth to eat it because you were hungry, that constituted work, and you're not allowed to work on the Sabbath, so you violated the Sabbath. And I don't know, maybe we should put you to death or something, right? So that's the way they looked at this. They're really upset with Jesus and his disciples that they did this. And I'm going to read that to you real quick. This is verses 1 through 5. On a Sabbath, while he was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked and ate some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?" And Jesus answered them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who are with him? How he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those with him." Verse 5, "And he said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Now don't be confused by those that were with him. That's going to come in chapter 22, all right? But for now, just look at the story itself. It is so abundantly clear to us that Jesus did not justify David's lies to get the bread. He's not condoning that, but what Jesus did justify was Ahimelech breaking one of the laws of Moses to give David food to meet a legitimate human need. And he does justify David's behavior here for taking the bread, eating something he normally wouldn't be allowed to do. It would be unlawful for him, but in order to satisfy his own legitimate human need. So that is definitely a consideration when we're trying to figure out, what do I do if keeping a law is going to hurt someone else? If you're ever in a situation where keeping a rule, keeping a law, or keeping a commandment would somehow harm innocent life, then you need to really stop and think about the decision. You need to weigh out those options. I would give you an example of that, but the Lord has given us the perfect example, and we are way out of time. This is a perfect example here. Like if Ahimelech refused to give David bread because, well, I can't violate the law of Moses. I'm not going to break the law for you, buddy. Love you and all, but I'm not going to displease the Lord. Okay, well, if David keeled over and died of starvation in the tabernacle, how do you think the Lord would have felt about Ahimelech? You think he'd have been like, good work. I mean, that was really tempting to give in. You know, he was really on his last leg, and he keeled over, and you didn't budge. You kept my law. Good job, buddy. You think he'd do that? Or you think he'd be like really peeved that Ahimelech was inconsiderate and heartless enough to say, no, I know you're really hungry and you really need this. This is a genuine human need, but I need to keep this rule. Sorry. So the Lord praised him for that. He commended him for that, putting genuine human need above a law or a rule, especially when it's a legalistic kind of rule that is built on top of the actual laws of Moses, the ceremonial law, or the 10 Commandments. When it comes to the law of God, the 10 Commandments, the law of Moses, all of that is meant to drive us in 2 major directions. Number 1, loving God and loving people. When David ate the holy bread, when Jesus' disciples ate grain on the Sabbath, they were honoring the true purpose behind the law. In both cases, it was to love others by providing for legitimate human need. There's much more to say there, but we are at nearly 55 minutes, so stand with me and let's close real quick.